second. Okay, hi. Welcome everybody. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, wherever you are in the world. My name is Claire and I am the Senior Community Manager for RSA US. Some of you I have met before, virtually or in person. And just on behalf of my colleagues at the US team, including Tony and then also Jess and Danny from Yale School of Architecture, Nicole Emmons, and our speakers, Mariana and Ann Morrow. Just like to thank you for joining us for today's salon, Exploring Creative Futures. So before we get started, we would like to give you a little bit of a background on the RSA, RSA US, and cover some kind of, I don't want to say ground rules, but how we kind of show up in this space together with each other. So if you're not aware of the RSA, we were founded in the UK. We are the Royal Society for Arts, Manufactures and Commerce, and have been uniting people and ideas to resolve the challenges of our time since 1754. And today, the Society exists as an international fellowship-driven social change organization. We are committed to a world that is resilient, rebalanced, and regenerative, where everyone can fulfill their potential. Our proven change process, rigorous research, innovative ideas, platforms, and unique global network of 30,000 changemakers work collectively to enable people, places, and the planet to flourish. So of the 31,000 fellows roughly spread out across the globe, about 1,200 or so live and work here in the US, including Jess Mitchell, who's calling in today from New Haven. So thanks, Jess, and nice to have you with us. And Mariana Amatullo, one of our speakers for today, who is based in New York right now. So we exist, in order to coordinate fellowship activities in the United States with an aim towards moving the needle on addressing the inequities of our society. And I just wanted to give a little bit of information on the Yale Women's Architecture Group and the students chapter. So a little bit about our event collaborators. Yale Women in Architecture Students was established in 2023 as an offshoot of the Yale Women in Architecture Group. And the student chapter fosters an inclusive, collaborative, and empowering environment through mentorship, advocacy, and diverse programming. And they facilitate events that engage students with questions of future practice, post-graduation life, and work-life balance, offering opportunities for professional growth, leadership, and discourse. And the Yale Women in Architecture group was established in 2013 with a mission to promote excellence and equity in the field of architecture-related professions. With a membership, the group focuses on such things like mentorship, advocacy, and programming, and promotes leadership and career advancement. Through an intergenerational exchange of experiences and knowledge, YWA fosters women's leadership and entrepreneurship in all facets of the ever-evolving profession of architecture and urbanism. Oof. That was a lot to say. I got tongue-tied there. But before I turn things over to our moderators, Nicole and Danning, I just wanted to go over some of those kind of ground rules that I talked about for today's event, which I've now kind of messed up in my PowerPoint. I have to go backwards. So I'll stop sharing my screen for a second. But just like you would have seen some of it when we were when you were joining our space, is just like how we show up as a community in this space. So things like, being mindful of your voice, making sure that we give everybody the opportunity to chat, that some people are just maybe a little bit more introverted and a bit more quiet, and making sure that we don't dominate the conversation, just being mindful of the language that we use, and being respectful of everybody's differences. So I won't probably spend too much more time on that because I want to just give space to introduce our moderators for the event, and also to just hand it over to our speakers to actually start the conversation. So I wanted to make sure that we have time to get Nicole and Danny on the screen and chatting away to us. So Nicole Emmons is an architect with over 25 years of experience in the design of academic, institutional, and residential buildings, as well as the preparation of master plans, design guidelines, and entitlement support and permitting for urban mixed-use developments, new communities, and strategic redevelopment sites. Nicole's leadership of multidisciplinary design teams has helped guide the strategic development of master plans in the Southeast, as well as New York State and California. She is currently a partner at Hart Howerton. Danny New, I hope I pronounced your last name correctly, but please let me know if I haven't, is a third-year Master of Architecture student at the Yale School of Architecture, serving on the leadership teams for both the Yale Women in Architecture student chapter and the YSOA API Students Initiative. She is a graduate of the Brown RISD dual degree program. She holds degrees in interior architecture with a focus on adaptive reuse and East Asian studies, and integrates an interdisciplinary approach with passion for narrative design. So I want to hand over to Nicole and Danning to chat about our speakers and to just set the tone for the rest of today's event. So I will stop talking, but thank you for bearing with me. And welcome everybody if you just joined us. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much, Claire, and thank you to all of you who have joined us virtually and in person. It's very exciting to be in 3 spaces or more, actually, at this moment. And I just want to thank the RSA and the Yale Women in Architecture students for organizing, putting so much work into getting us here today. They have been so incredible to work with, and I am really honored to be part of the conversation and hear from the 2 women who are with us today. Mariana Amatullo is a practitioner scholar, academic administrator, and design strategist with a global practice. She's a core faculty member of the Parson School of Design Strategies here in New York City, where she has taught since 2017, and a founding faculty member of the graduate minor in civic service design. Mariana's research and consulting emphasizes the role of design as a cognitive tool for transforming organizational culture and driving innovation. Since joining the new school, Mariana has served in senior academic leadership positions focused on innovation in the provost's office. In her role as vice provost and academic dean for the continuing and professional education, she has spearheaded global partnerships and pedagogical innovation in online and hybrid learning. So she's an expert at all of this, while overseeing the development of programs and certificates in fields such as creativity and AI, speculative design, biodesign, DEI and social justice, fashion studies, and luxury management, to name a few, with a student body ranging from pre-college to executives who are well established in their professions. She is incredibly equipped to speak to us today, thinking about next steps in careers, creative careers in particular. Thank you, Mariana, for joining us.
Thank you so much. It's a pleasure.
And I have the pleasure to introduce Ann Morrow Johnson, one of Exelic's 100 most creative visionaries in experiential and in Blue Loop's top 10 in immersive, leading the global immersive experience entertainment practice for Gensler. With decades of industry experience across cultural, hospitality, theatrical, entertainment, and institutional sectors, most recently as global head of creative development for Walt Disney Imagineering, she blends futurism and storytelling with design thinking to create emotionally resonant experiences. Having designed exhibits, installations, and engaging spaces for visionary companies and the foremost cultural institutions such as National Geographic, the Association for Cultural Enterprises, and the RMX Lab, she combines insights from the cutting edge of emerging experiential possibilities with a deep tradition in how people engage. And welcome, Ann Morrow. It's a pleasure to have you and Mariana here.
Thanks so much for having us. We're jazzed to be here.
So to begin today's conversation, I would like to begin by delving into both your diverse experiences and multifaceted roles. So both of you have transitioned between different sectors, and we're curious to hear from you what inspired these shifts and what lessons you have carried forward. So Mariana, your career spans museum curatorial practice, academia, design strategy, and administrative leadership. How has your path evolved from early work to your current role as professor and vice provost at the new school Parsons? And to Ann Morrow, you've had a fascinating journey from Walt Disney Imagineering to leading Gensler's global immersive experience and entertainment practices. Could you walk us through some pivotal moments in your career that lead you to where you are today? Thank you.
Thank you. And again, a warm welcome to everyone virtually and in person in London and Yale. And it's such an honor to be part of this. I'm a proud fellow of the RSA for the last 9 years or so. So I was delighted to be invited to this conversation. In terms of the shifts in my career trajectory, I would say that it's been an aggregation or an accumulation of experiences that have taken me from one chapter to the next. I was trained in art history and curatorial studies and worked in museums in Los Angeles for the first chapter of my career. and then ended up in this fantastic School of Design Art Center before joining Parsons and the new school. And that shift from museum practice to academia was rather organic for me because at the beginning of my role, a lot of my work was taking a curatorial approach to building what became a quite distinguished program in social innovation and design that continues these days called Design Matters. So while it seemed like a very big leap, in reality, I was still trained as a visual person and then encountering design and design education. And the work I did at the beginning was really putting together, very much like a curator, projects in the curriculum and people with partnerships to really create opportunities for our students to have experiential learning in different parts of the world. And then moving into the administrative work and the work at Parsons and the new school, and some of the global work I do in different boards, I would say the shifts have been easier for me because I'm an inherently curious person. So that curiosity has driven me to explore new roles and new functions and be a lifelong learner, which has made it easier. And I'll stop at that.
So I think, like Mariana, I mean, again, so excited to be here. Thank you all for having me. It's so great to be a part of this conversation. And I think curiosity is really the thing, right? The feeling like there is possibility to go from one thing to the next and see what feels cool or interesting has definitely been a guiding light for me as well. I'm sort of a theater kid by nature. I directed some shows, I acted in some shows, I was in a really bad improv company for a little bit, and I always really liked to draw. I wasn't terribly afraid of math, so I was doing some theater things, but needed to like make money somehow, and so was working in interior design and actually wound up at Robert Stern, the former dean of YSOA in New York, doing interiors and architecture, kind of the intersection of the two. And he told me I needed an architecture license and needed to go back to school and get a graduate degree. So went to YSOA, and then found this internship at Walt Disney Imagineering, where all of a sudden I found kind of the intersection of theater and storytelling and placemaking and how you think about the idea of storytelling in physical space, which then led to a decade of fascinating adventures, doing everything from designing, Star Wars roller coasters to overnight experiences where you kind of lived in immersive theater to eventually leading creative development for Disney. But that was always really, it was lovely because I learned a lot about how to think about the emotional experience of place. Like, how do you make something feel scary? How do you make something feel fun? How do you make something feel welcoming? How do you make something feel inviting? But it was always within this very specific bubble of Disney stories or Disney experiences. And so when I got a call from Gensler, which is, one of the largest design firms in the world that does everything from, hospitality to museums and culture to themed entertainment to civic reconstruction in the middle of cities, it was this fascinating opportunity to apply all of the things that I feel like I've been learning over the past however many years and apply that idea of location-based storytelling to the real world. And so how do you think about, how does the idea of a place become as cool as actually being in the place and using essentially theatrical tricks for making that true in the real world?
So with following up on that, with respect to being in the world of Disney, and thinking about the audience, I am curious as far as the scales that you worked within and your creative approach, how, going from, say, the scale of a theme park to the scale of a single event within the theme park, where was your role in each one of those? And as a leader at Disney, how did you bring your own approach through and into the culture of a place that has a very established creative culture? And I'm curious now at Gensler, you have this incredible opportunity to shape the profession in a way based on your experience. I'm very curious how your audience, how scales of work and your own creative process have shaped your work, your role in those individual projects, and then now your role at Gensler.
Yeah, for sure. So I think regardless of the scale of the experience, whether it is something for two people to have a really intimate moment or 7,000 an hour that you're trying to crank through, at least for me, it's about being clear about what the story is that we're telling and what the emotional note is that we're trying to hit. Like I think of it in terms of when you hear the first strings of music in the first scene of the film, you know how you're supposed to feel. This is either a scary movie or it's a lovely movie or it's a romantic movie or whatever. And thinking about that, like what is this primary emotion and how do we make that clear in the first moment is true kind of at any scale of either the tiniest moment to the biggest one. The trick then becomes how do you invite everyone into that space to feel like they are having that connection or that experience or that story. And I would say that on the more intimate projects, it's easier because it's easier to be clear about what the tools are for making that real at scale. And especially when you're leading teams of tens, hundreds, thousands of people, it really becomes how do we communicate a clarity of purpose and then allow everyone there are so many people who are so much more creative than I am in so many different specific realms to be clear about we're all going this way together, but you are better in your field than anyone else. So you come up with the creative world that makes this way true in your field of expertise. And so I'm a big believer in that, like, projects are only as good as everyone feels like they own them. And so trying to create a culture of ownership with unified direction is the thing that I think is what makes these projects work at scale. Because at 7,000 an hour in a theme park, or now at Gensler, when we're looking at projects all around the world and at all of these different scales, making sure that we've got a clear story and a clear sense of emotional engagement, and then allowing everyone within the team to basically be unified behind that and create that truth within their field of expertise.
Likewise, Mariana, your audience ranges. I was reading about all the offerings through both the minor that you've created and the continuing education department at Parsons at the new school. You're crafting a way of thinking that is in discussion with teenagers, college students, first year design professionals, and even executives. Can you talk a little bit about how that diversity of audience has shaped the way you create curriculum now and what you're thinking about next with that?
Sure. So, at the new school and at Parsons, our work is very much collective. So I would say that in all of these areas, these different programs, there are directors, right, that really specialize a little bit like Ann Morrow was saying in the craft of that target group and that audience, whether it's K-12 education, the summer academies we have at Parsons, whether it's executive education or adult certificates. In the role I've occupied as academic dean, I've had the great privilege to work with all these colleagues and really emphasize a sense of design-led and social sort of awareness purpose in the different audiences we're touching. So I'm really looking at curriculum that is innovative and fresh and has those design attributes, whether we're looking at young kids and an experience at Parsons over the summer, or whether we're working with executives and corporations and companies where we have very busy adults who might be connected to us only for a week. And we want to make sure that they are really engaging with making processes, with design, attitude, mindsets in terms of the value we bring. So the continuing thread for me is always examining, and when we're working with curriculum at the degree level at Parsons, there is always this core, right, and this North Star of trying to understand relevance and the different a curriculum must have in terms of fresh contemporary design discourse, scholarship in the case of degrees and especially graduate degrees, and that ecosystem that makes our curriculum relevant. And increasingly, as we know, it's a lot about the critical thinking skills, the social economic awareness of how, as creatives, we are living in this world and living with each other. And those values are really very important to us as an institution at the New School and at Parsons overall.
Could you share an experience, potentially executives coming from outside the creative fields who are this is their first exposure potentially to the creative mindset? Can you share a little bit, maybe a challenge?
Yeah, so
that really
I will,
became an
yes, I'm
innovation?
happy to talk about a program that I had the opportunity to set up a partnership for with the ESSEC Business School in France. And this is a luxury management and design innovation 1-year long executive master's program. And there we have people that are coming from the world of business, but also from the world of design, that are interested in the luxury sector specifically. And they might be from the built environment, they might be coming from communications, again, from a very traditional merchandising perspective, all to be part of a program that takes them to 5 capitals around the world for very intensive week-long residencies, and then online learning and hybrid learning in between for a year. This is a program that was founded at ESSEC, and we joined at Parsons 3-4 years ago. A much more design-led curriculum across the program, but also with colleagues like John Bartlett, who direct the program these days, are curating these residencies. And I'm always very inspired by
We lose Mariana. Okay.
he was the, can you hear me?
Yes, you
so a
froze for just a
specific
moment.
example, one of our former students, a graduate, was the chief financial officer of one of the largest communication companies in the Middle East, and somebody with already a PhD, an MBA, but who came to this program in luxury management and design innovation because he wanted to understand creative processes to apply to this IT communication, very large company that he leads as the chief financial officer. His sense of that industry was that it was not applying sufficiently creative strategies to think about the future of communication and technology and IT into the next decades. And he found in sort of the design methodologies that are part of our program an opportunity to really challenge himself to be out of his comfort zone, out of his domain of expertise, finance and technology, and really have an expanded toolkit to think about the future and the problem solving and the complexity that he's confronted with daily. I love that example. And of course, he was an exemplary, successful executive student of that program. And this is, again, the EMILUX program is the acronym between ESSEC and Parsons.
Well, I think that actually is a great segue to hear, Ann Morrow, from you. I'm curious about challenges that you faced, and in particular, given the scale, given the work at Gensler and the work at Disney Imagineering, and the experts that you described, the number of experts in their own fields coming into the room, coming into a project or a site or just some initial thinking about it, is there an example of a, a challenge in particular that you faced early or more recently in your role or former role, that really opened up, your own thinking creatively to, even, start to adjust the way you approached a problem, and it became an opportunity. So thinking about that multidisciplinary group of individuals, all experts, all at the top of their game, and how sometimes that brings
Yeah, everyone's got opinions and everyone's got feelings.
That's
always.
right.
Man, so many examples. I think my favorite one, though, of learning that not only are people coming at things with different priorities, different ways of approaching things, different fields of expertise, different perspectives, all of it, there's also often just different languages in different industries. Like words literally mean different things to different people. And so if I am in a room with finance executives, I cannot talk about the emotional experience of place. Like, no one cares. I want to understand what the bottom line is and how you're going to increase your return, increase your per capita spend, increase your dwell time, and increase your intent to recommend based off of whatever it is that you've designed. All of those words turn off the people who are here to be artists and designers and the ones who are making the feeling sauce true, that make it true that people do in fact want to dwell in a space for a longer period of time, and the likelihood that they will want to spend money to be there and feel like they are participating in an experience. Like, there is an authenticity of that emotional experience that actually is art. And finding the way to mirror the language of different people in different rooms so that they feel invited into the conversation to take ownership of whatever it is that their goal is and their need is. And my favorite moment of this, we were trying to figure out essentially an operational model for how to get people to participate in an experience. We knew you wanted to feel like you were in a spaceship. We knew that we wanted to have it be sort of like a summer camp type thing where you could go to different activities and feel like you were participating in, space. And we were talking to this operations person who his whole job was to make sure that like the operational model was going to be as efficient as possible and there was going to be as little friction as possible. And we were trying to describe, and we're going to have this series of these different activities. We're going to invite people into different forms of gameplay and interaction. Some people are going to like wield lightsabers. Other people, we're going to invite them to do like a cocktail mixology thing. And you could just sort of see his eyes glaze over of like, I don't care. I don't know why. Until all of a sudden he had this fascinating moment where it clicked and he goes, oh, you're doing a cruise model. You're doing a cruise model with flex programming and a range of itinerary capabilities that can be, moderated on board. And it was just like, what you said. But immediately having that moment of, he understood the intent behind what we were trying to do in his language. And then he became our biggest champion of everyone else who didn't understand what we were trying to accomplish from an experience standpoint. He was then able to kind of translate into operational speak. And so I think it's finding like the common ground for what he's trying to accomplish, what we're trying to accomplish, and then put it into the language that is as least scary as possible.
I can only imagine the number of stories you might have. So, to think about the strategies for bridging those gaps. And I know it's important, that aha moment that an individual has and so forth, but then there are sometimes the gaps in understanding that you have to navigate for an entire room or entire business, or discipline. Maybe Ann Morrow, if you could speak a little bit about that, and Mariana as well. Just those, your own skills and lessons learned from your careers, for bridging those gaps in either experience, for example, the students, or knowledge base, to move forward so that everyone is the owner of the experience and it moves forward together.
Sure. I mean, I think again, I'm a big believer in listening. I'm a big believer in trying to kind of understand where people are coming from so that you can invite them to participate in the way that makes the most sense. And I think that's true both on a design scale and on an engagement scale. It was fascinating. I one time was working with this brilliant designer, but who is extremely introverted and very much a game mechanics thinker. And I will never forget, she was telling me that the way she thought about designing spaces was based on whether she could sit somewhere with her back to a wall where there was no chance of her being forced to be directly across from someone because that requires conversation. And she wanted to play. She wanted to feel like she was in a room where stories were happening. She wanted to feel like she understood how the game mechanics were happening. But I will kind of never forget this moment of, oh, you literally think about space differently than I do. And kind of finding the room for what makes each designer brilliant and kind of helping to try to draw that out, because if that's the way she thinks, that's also the way whatever percentage of guests or people who are participating also think or want to engage and, feel and participate. And so I will be honest, I do think it is easier to get to know folks one-on-one. And when you're in a room, it's about trying to create and foster that like environment of dialogue. And I often find, especially if things get a little spicy or a little bit, if you've got two groups that just sort of willfully don't understand each other, coming back to a sort of squishy empathy place of, oh, I think what I'm hearing from you is, or, oh, it's really scary for me too, that trying to treat everyone, I mean, it sounds super basic and silly, but treating everyone like people first, it is amazing how much more you get kind of the best design thinking or strategic thinking or creative thinking out of everyone if we kind of create the space for people to feel a little silly or a little curious or a little bit out of their comfort zone.
Thank you. And I'll build on a couple of these points that Ann Morrow was saying based on, experiences. The first one around language, right? We know that our design language can be a bit of a jargon. So I think having that self-awareness and self-criticality that when we are trying to bridge with clients, partners, in another discipline, that even the word design can mean or not have sufficient meaning. I always remember as a researcher or spending a year doing an ethnographic study at UNICEF headquarters here in New York City with the innovation team at UNICEF at the time. This is probably 8 years ago. And in this innovation team, there were a number of professionally trained designers, right, along with policy people and finance people and tech people. And the design team, as they were doing this work, both at headquarters, but also with regional offices around the world, many times were not using the word design, not using the word prototyping, things we take for granted, but presenting them in this international development context. Design might have meant, creating a cool poster or putting up something, a product, and when they were trying to really work in a very strategic and service-oriented multicultural way. So language matters, and when you're trying to bridge in situations of multidisciplinarity, complex ideas, how you present that language and make it understandable to others with a sense of humility and self-awareness, that is an important approach. Individually, again, as an author and researcher and professor, I really work in the space of social innovation and design, so across many disciplines of design, but with sectors like public policy folks or folks that are working in public health. And there are some of the strategies for setting up partnerships, but also working successfully to get design projects through that I have studied or led, it comes a lot to this question of establishing trust, right, and psychological safety, which in the example Ann Morrow was giving is fundamental. So relying on, leadership, common sense practices when you are trying to bridge information or pushing projects through is important. And then being aware of, what we call in management institutional logics. When you're working with an NGO, or in contexts where the decisions, the design intervention decision might have very strong consequences. In the case of UNICEF, if kids don't get vaccinated in time because you ran a different pilot with a new sort of design protocol, that might be children dying, right? So the institutional logics of these organizations deal with accountability, they deal with other important priorities that as design and creatives we need to be aware of. So the idea of risk-taking, even in some contexts other than ours, have other implications. And you cannot just go in and say, let's take risks and be playful and fail fast, right? Something we love to say in a lot of our methods and environments, without understanding the implications of what that might mean for the decision makers in that room. So it's a lot about that self-awareness, that humility, and that understanding that language and the sort of logics that and the accountability that others have to be judged by are factors that you have to integrate in your design brief.
I think we're gonna shift and talk about design and education, but I think this has been an incredible preface to that. The things that you both are talking about aren't necessarily taught in school and learned more as part of the experience of the work. So I'm going to turn it over to Danny and ask a few questions about creative futures and design education.
Yeah, thank you so much for sharing. And I think the insights about how you bridged design thinking and also thinking about how to work with diverse audiences and across industry is super fascinating. And I think from a student perspective, I'm also just curious to think how as students or even those professionals who are considering maybe entering building those skill sets, what would you think is the most significant skills or types of or ways of thinking that allows us to be better prepared for this multidisciplinary innovation and also design for social changes? Thank you.
Yeah, so thank you for that question. That's a sort of a top of mind question. One of the questions that keeps me up at night, I would say, in my teaching and the curriculum development I do, in the research I do. It's a critical question. I think that the first one is to understand, right, what are the unique sort of value we bring as designers, as architects, as creatives into these spaces. We really bring a sense of craft and the power of making, of turning ideas, and in many cases, very abstract issues into very tangible, concrete artifacts. And I don't mean artifact just as a product, but artifact with a capital A. That power of visualizing, making concrete an aspiration, a dream sometimes that a partner or a client might not be completely articulating is fantastic. It's one of the reasons I'm a professor in the design field and why I hang out with incredible designers for the last 25 years. It is not a power that other disciplines have, right? And I have a PhD in management, so I've been around many business folks for the last 15 years. But that quality we bring of craft and of making, to me, is essential, and it is one of the secret sauces, I would say. And so being aware of what that means is I think a first step. The second is also understanding the mindsets we bring, and we have an opportunity to really bridge, have that divergent thinking in our as creatives, of connecting the dots that other disciplines are less fluent with, I would say, right? That are more sort of linear in their thinking. So that flexibility and nimbleness to be fluid, to connect the dots, to apply sort of a lot of empathy in problem solving, but also problem seeking, are again incredible assets that the design education brings. And then that manifests in a very, very powerful way when you are working in a multidisciplinary professional setting.
Yeah, I mean, I think that
Ann.
Yeah, no, I mean, I think that idea of making the abstract tangible is absolutely the thing, right? That it is amazing how many times we'll be in rooms and the person who can communicate an idea in a diagram on a whiteboard is the way you can have the most concrete conversation. That, I think especially, I know we keep coming back to language, but I do think this idea of language is really difficult because what I mean by one word may mean something different. And I know that like when I was in design school, I was very concerned about whether my idea was good and beautiful, and the how I was creating the paperwork to show the idea was sort of the output of, is my idea pretty? And what I think that I realize the most in the day to day is the much more important thing is the idea clear? Am I communicating what I am trying to say in 3 dimensions clearly in a diagram, even if it's a rough sketch? And I do think that that is something that design and creative institutions, they are teaching an entirely other language that is one of the most universal ones, right? We can all kind of watch together as we draw an arrow around, we're trying to go in this direction. And so the ability to visualize an idea so that we can try to figure out if we are all saying the same thing or trying to design the same thing is crucial and critical. And it is my favorite thing that I learned in architecture school is it is another language, and it's a way to gather community and the ability to kind of connect people in a common direction.
Yeah, I think it is building on top of that. I think it's fascinating. And what I'm hearing is also kind of, in a way, there's a sense of kind of this timelessness of the creative thinking, the idea of the clarity versus how we can build up our skill sets, maybe to kind of respond to ever evolving design industry and like and the kind of creative field. So I think on top of that, I want to add a question regarding technology and kind of the ever-changingness of the industry itself. What are you, could you both share some thoughts or suggestions on kind of your attitude towards incorporating new technology, and what is the best way that we can make use of that and also kind of discovering new values in it? Thank you.
I'm happy to start. I think for me, curiosity, going back to the very beginning, is kind of the best way to approach anything, right? Like being a little bit afraid of something. I will never forget the first time I like put my first mid-journey, what is this image going to be? Or I went not too long ago on a National Geographic experience in the Galapagos where I was supposed to wear my Apple Vision Pro for the whole 7 days to figure out what mixed reality opportunities there might be in tourism. And I just really hated it with my whole heart. But I learned a lot about what the current constraints are with what exists in technology and was able to think about what the future opportunities are. And so I guess I would say that everything on some level is a tool, and thinking about what we are trying to design, what we are trying to do, whether it is about how you are designing or the implementation of different technologies in, the actual output or the guest experience or the user experience. Everything's a tool. Sometimes the most cutting edge thing, playing around with it and finding a new capability for it, is exactly what you want. Like, there's some amazing advancements in point source audio right now that can literally make you feel like something is talking to you inside of your head, because we can point source the audio that clearly between this space and this space. And sometimes what you want is a piece of paper and a marker to communicate an idea. And kind of being fluid and flexible within any of that, it is all just tools for design, for communication, for feeling feels, for designing spaces. And I also think that curiosity allows for some amount of flexibility, and you don't have to be perfect at anything, but willing to try and explore and be open to the possibilities of what is emerging. Like, I think it's a running joke in my family that I, am one of the foremost futurist experts on mixed reality, and I do not know how to turn on my television in my home. And that's okay, right? It's about finding the moments to be curious and then figure out what's important to you in your own space.
I'll build on Ann Morrow's again. So we think a lot about technology as educators, obviously, and it's an evolving space, and we all know how quickly it's changing in transforming practices. It's definitely something we're thinking about at an institutional level at Parsons in terms of curriculum development and understanding how do we make sure that our students, right, are getting exposed to the latest technologies and evolving technologies, very much as Ann Morrow is saying, as tools. But what I would add to that around the tools is, yes, we should treat them as tools, but we should remember that tools also, and we've seen this historical, tend to have huge impacts and change, and they start changing our sort of logics and behaviors. So the questions around ethics of these of technology, around diversity and bias and implicit bias of these technologies, around questions around IP, questions about sourcing data, understanding where even the data sets are coming sometimes. Some of this is, and when we think about Gen AI, a lot of it is still a work in progress. So if we have like one critical sort of imperative here, I think it is to understand that we have to go in with curiosity, with playfulness, and also understand the limitations and potentially some of the pitfalls, while also embracing all of the efficiencies, and that some of these new technology tools are bringing that might accelerate and free up space for us to be more creative, right, and intentional in our day-to-day elsewhere. So it's a complicated question.
We could have had an entire panel on this question. It's incredible given both from where both of you come from, and how today and moving forward you're thinking about these bigger questions. Trained as architects or art historians and thinking about these very big and important questions. We have a question from the room at Yale, I believe.
Oh, okay. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay, great. This is a little bit more of a personal question for Ann Morrow. I'm curious from your perspective, working with Bob Stern and also going to school at YSOA, where I'm currently like in a place about to graduate where it feels like there's a lot of pressure to like go to New York and go work at a big firm. And that's almost like our responsibility as like Yale students to do that. And anything else is like not valid. I don't know. That's kind of like what I've been feeling as also a person who like, I felt like my dream 5 years ago was to be a Disney Imagineer, which is so funny hearing from you, but then also like second guessing myself because now I'm here where there's like, they're really like pushing us to go work at these big firms. So I'm curious from your perspective, what it was like going from being at school here to working at Disney, and if you felt that like the skills that you learned here like really applied and that you were like able to make a big difference there because of your education, if that makes
Great
sense.
question.
Yeah,
Great
totally.
question.
Man, a lot of things. First of all, follow your heart. Like so after it was fascinating getting the job at Disney actually and being ready to graduate, and everyone was going to, you know, SOM and Norman Foster and all these places. And I was really excited about my getting ready to go to Disney. I'd had an internship, so I knew I had enjoyed the sort of storytelling in physical space. But I had this, I don't, is Peter Eisenman still around? I had a conversation with him at graduation, and he was like, "So what are you doing?" I was like, "I'm going to go to Disney." And he turns to the guy next to him and goes, "Well, they can't all be success stories." And there is this perception of storytelling in architecture potentially being two different things, right? That there's the sort of philosophical big capital A architecture, and then there are other styles of things. There's entertainment, there's residential, there's, institutional, there's more corporate architecture, whatever. And I guess like for many of my classmates, it was absolutely the right thing to do to go to New York and work for the big architecture firm and feel like they were working on these really high profile competitions. But for me, there was no getting around that, a year after being at Disney, watching two Star Wars fans like cry in each other's arms because I had just opened an experience where they got to feel like they were a part of their most favorite franchise and then showing each other their matching Star Wars tattoos. Like, it's a different culture and the satisfaction's really different, but I love it, right? Because it is watching people have their most joyful and connected moments with the people that they love. Like, this is how they are choosing to spend their time to connect and to be together. And the fact that you are getting to choreograph those moments, I think, is really beautiful. And so I don't know that there's a wrong answer. I also don't think that your first job out of architecture school is necessarily also the end all be all of your entire career, right? Like, I think I had 7 different roles within Disney before I then came over here to Gensler and am exploring storytelling beyond the IP space. And so do what makes you happy. And also, if you discover that it doesn't make you happy, do the next thing.
Great advice. I mean,
Thank you.
it's a long life ahead and a long
Yeah,
career ahead.
not over.
And it can have many iterations and look different at different times in your life. We have a question from the chat I'm going to read. And then I think we're going to go to London for a question. Okay. A unified field, holistic in nature, this is from Zen in the chat, yields serendipitous and synchronistic moments that reveal its natural flow. It seems to apply to any endeavor, having experienced it across multiple projects and industries. The focus of attention, intention, and interactions toward curiosity, innovation, and making common sense leads toward enjoyable play and work that exceeds expectations, perhaps even hopes. If this is so, here's the question: how do critical thinking skills development of critical thinking skills move towards a unified field? How do critical thinking skills development toward a unified field occur? And I think I will just piggyback on that. There was also a question about how are students prepared with starting and beginning in professional practice. It's almost, those two kind of almost play against each other. How do those critical thinking skills development toward a unified field occur? And then the preparation of students for the
Yes.
field.
So big questions, and thank you so much for that very eloquent framing. So I would say that, and difficult to answer the question about how prepared are students to leave our institutions in terms and practice, because of course we are very proud of the education we impart. The readiness can be different depending on the individual trajectories. But, there are some rules of thumb. First, you are doing your very best to create curriculum that is, again, very relevant, that has the long view. We know that we're preparing students for careers that are not out there yet, for technologies that are not out there yet. So imparting them with skills that are connected to craft and making, and imparting them with a lot of information they can draw from and experiences to develop their own point of view, their own criticality, bring their own life experience into the practice, their own cultural background into the practice, celebrating, right, the diversity of a very international body like we have at Parsons becomes very critical. And hopefully by the time they leave, they are feeling empowered and have a really solid sort of set of things to draw from. I always say that, I'm so privileged to be in the educational space, because the educational space is a place where you can have a bit of that blue sky thinking, that experimentation, that curiosity, and have a healthy dose of crit that comes at you. And you certainly have deadlines, but you're not billing by the hour necessarily. And that opens up a freedom to push the boundaries, right, of what you might be making in a way that's very liberating and precious. And I think in that regard, it's that moment for deliberation and pushing for creativity. Innovation is something we have to do as professors and as students and as partners in that learning in our educational institutions. So I think we do our very best to make sure that people leave equipped, and there's the standard things like internships, like having a lot of proximity to design opportunities in the curriculum with practitioners and with partners that allow you to exercise that space of practice. In terms of the framing, the eloquent framing ahead and before in the question, I don't want to be reductive in my answer, but what I would say again is I see success, right, when we push for that integration with a sense of foresight and responsibility. And there I would apply it to to the space of international development, where we've seen a lot of work by creatives and designers and architects that result in shiny objects that fail, right? You can go through many case studies of work in the global South, very well-intentioned, big budgets, but then people really didn't think of the unintended consequences, maybe, of that built environment or product they designed or service. The research and co-participatory sort of framework of this work was not there. The local community as a stakeholder, was not sufficiently involved in that development, and then things fail. So I think that there is really always for me this priority of trying to look ahead beyond that one design brief and that outcome, and taking a long view. And that typically involves a lot of multicultural awareness and field time beyond one's own knowledge and discipline. Yes.
Thank you. Thank you, Paula and Zen, for putting those questions in. I'd love to, speaking of other zones, time zones, see if there's a question at the RSA house. Do we have a question in the room?
Hello, everyone. Thank you so much for this wonderful presentation. I've got a couple of questions. I've got one for Mariana And it is, how has your research and work within pedagogy influenced your professional practice in recent times? And then I have an open question for Nicole and Anne. Do you have any advice for students to push the boundaries regarding liminal spaces in the physical and digital realms? Thank you.
Thank you. Ann Morrow, do you want to go first? Because I heard you might have a time priority issue, right?
Sure. Yeah, I mean, I think that the idea of space is becoming more and more philosophical. That the fact that we are spending so much time gamifying our lives on our phones, like in a world where we're tracking our physical footsteps on our technological devices, the fact that our conversations are happening, as much just like this event today, in part digitally, in part physically, the blur between the digital and the physical is just increasing more and more every day. And I think for me, in terms of liminal spaces, often the most interesting question becomes, where do you form community? Like, because it is often in those interstitial spaces. Like, I often think of, like, in the old world town piazza, or in the streets, or in the, gathering space of a campus or a building. The digital version of that has historically been, more of a chat room or a sharing space or whatever. But there again, these spaces are becoming more and more blurred. And one of the things that we're starting to see is, just as physical space is becoming more and more of like a hub and spoke model, if you'll see these points of gathering spaces, you are also seeing points of gathering spaces in technology, and finding more and more ways to tie those together so that people who are seeking moments of connection can, is cool. And so that's everything from finding social media interactions in physical spaces in things like bars or sporting events, to in live engagements on streets. And so I think we'll continue to see that blurring, and the more we can help it be a space for gathering and community and good, rather than increased echo chambers, to Mariana's earlier, let's all be both curious and joyful and playful about where the future is taking us, but also thoughtful about constructing it in the future that we want to create.
Well, I think also to add to that, and to add to some points, Ann Morrow, that you made earlier, clarity is everything. So in pushing the boundaries, I love the idea of students coming into the workplace with new ideas, new ways of doing things, and pushing those boundaries of how we think about how we communicate design. Clarity will take you so much further than confusion, right? So thinking about in those spaces and in that digital world, the clarity relationship to the built environment, to the physical built environment, how is, frankly, it's a very direct connection. Is the space I'm in comfortable? Is the space I'm in at a scale that is comfortable for me as an individual, or a group of 30? Or what happens when 300 people are in this space? Have I right-sized it? That same idea translates back to the digital world, and actually can start to really hone your understanding of spatial design. So I think bringing in new ideas, new technologies, ways of communicating, all of those are welcome. The biggest, output, though, ultimately the output for it to be at its strongest, it should be clear and easy to understand, avoiding the jargon. If I'm a user, or I'm someone visiting this digital space, I want to know how to navigate it as someone who's never been there before, and be comfortable in the same way that I would want to do so in a new town, or a new community, or a new core of a city.
So I know the other question was about pedagogy and
Should
how
she re-ask it?
Sure, it was pedagogy and how it influenced my practice. And this goes for any of you who might be teaching or might be thinking about teaching in the future. I've always privileged space for pedagogy and teaching, even when I've had very sort of full plates as an academic administrator, because I say always students and teaching keeps me honest and grounded. And I learned so much from being in a space where I am in dialogue with my students who are bringing up important questions where that then influence how I think about infrastructure on macro level problem solving that we might be doing in the institution. So things are very connected to me. Pedagogy is also a place where you're developing learning outcomes, where you're developing a trajectory, right? An arc of growth, of progress. You start a course in one place and then you end hopefully with a set of other insights. And that process of curriculum development and of teaching really informs how I think about my research, how I'm, putting together a new book these days. And it's very, very present. Understanding, okay, how will I write this chapter so that my reader will have a sense of new insights, by the end of that chapter. Or how might I develop a research protocol in a questionnaire? So there's a sense again of learning and insights that come across. So very intertwined and a great gift to be in the space of teaching. Thank you for the question.
Well, thank you both so much, and Danny, for your leadership in this panel. I want to applaud the RSA US and the Yale School of Architecture Women in Architecture student group for organizing us today and getting us all here to start to think together. I hope there are opportunities for this conversation to continue. I would love to hear more from both of you, hear more from the students and from RSA House. So thank you again so much. I really, I hope you all carry on your day with these thoughts and hopefully they continue to inspire and help you to think differently about the next steps in your career or in a project.
Thank you to everyone, and thank you to all the questions.
I'll just do a quick wrap up if that's okay for folks, because I know everyone's winding down or running to other meetings or events or having their dinner if they're in London. So just a huge thank you to our speakers today. It was such a delight to hear about your experiences, and I love that storytelling and place and liminal spaces and career trajectories, all of it came up, and it's some juicy topics. So I'm sure we could talk about this for days. So thank you so much for sharing your experience and for such great questions. I wanted to just share one or two things as we wrap up our time together. Oh no, of course it's not working. There we go. Slides. Okay, where am I? I just wanted to share one or two bits with you before we wrap up, and that's about the fellowship community. For folks who are within the fellowship community, we have a space on Circle, which is kind of like our community platform for fellows to continue this conversation. So I'll be posting some of the resources that were shared there. And if folks want to continue just engaging in this topic, you could do so there. But then also, if you're interested in joining our community, feel free to reach out. Some information is on your screen there that you can see. And also, yeah, just be in touch. You can check in with us on Circle. You can email me. I'm claire.byrne@thersa.us, the rsa.org, sorry. Or you can email my colleague, Tony, and we would love to hear from you. But we will be sending out an email later today with all the recording and links shared during the event. And just a massive, massive thank you for being in community with us today and spending time with us. It's been a joy, and have a great rest of your day. And thank you again. Take care, everybody.
Thank you. Thank you,